Good morning, good evening. I'm Julie Cohen, and welcome to Work Life Leader Live. This is a conversation with interesting people about topics on the intersection of work, life, and leadership. And I'm so glad you're here. It is Friday, February 13th, and it is in the year of 2026, in case you're watching this in the future. And it is 12 p.m. Eastern US time. And I know we often have visitors from many time zones. So I want to welcome you to today's conversation. It's a great topic and we have a wonderful guest. So I'm going to get us started. So I want to bring on my colleague and guest today, Kelly George. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Julie.
Welcome to Work Life Leader Live.
I'm very happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm glad we made this happen. This was a long time in the making with lots of life in the middle of work and leader. So it's great to be here. And it's really good to talk about a really important topic that I know is very personal to you. So our topic today is learning from long-term illness. And the subheading is wellness and ambition, which when Kelly and I were working on coming up with the title, we thought it was, we both agreed this one hit because there was kind of two sides of a really, just two sides that need to be addressed when we're talking about the idea of long-term illness. So with that, I want to welcome everyone again. You're watching Work Life Leader Live, and I'm here with Kelly George, Dr. Kelly George, and we're talking about learning from long-term illness. So before I even introduce Kelly, which I'm going to do next, I want to welcome anyone who may be watching live. So if you're here watching live, a lot of our communication today will be through whatever platform you're on, through the chat, through your chat or comment function. I'm able to see all the comments, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions for Kelly. We want to hear your experiences. So what makes this conversation most valuable for all of us is hearing from everyone. So to get started, if you're watching live, again, Friday, February 13th, put in the chat box, introduce yourself, say hello, where you're watching from, and do hashtag live so we know you're with us. And I will say hello and let Kelly know that you are here. So we definitely want to hear from you. But now I'd love to formally introduce Dr. Kelly George. And she is a coach, educator, and facilitator with more than a decade of experience teaching and leading in higher education. She develops coaching and peer support programs focused on fatigue recovery, personal wellness, and sustainable professional growth. Prior to becoming a coach, Kelly took 3 years away from paid work to focus on recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID. So again, welcome, Kelly. And just to kind of affirm kind of this conversation, obviously I'm very fortunate. I don't have the same kind of experience you have around long-term illness, which I know you're going to share shortly. But the issue of sustainable professional growth has been something that has been central in my work for the last 25 years. So I'm really excited to talk about this with you. And we have one person who said hello already, Julie Perkins. Hello, good to hear from you. And she's live. So again, if you're watching live, please let us know, put in your chat box platform, say hello, tell us where you're watching from, and use hashtag live. So we're going to get started. If you're a regular watcher of Work Life Leader Live, I always like to start with an icebreaker where I ask our guest a question. And then I'm going to come to you to answer that question too. So as you're listening to Kelly's answer, please, I want to know your answer too. And then I'm going to answer it also. So Kelly, we use the word ambition in the title of our conversation today. So what's your ambition, or what does ambition mean to you? I just want to get your personal thoughts on that word ambition.
Yeah. I think it's a fun word because it to me immediately sparks that dark side and light side thing. Like when I hear ambition, there's a part of me that thinks, "Oh no, I'm going to push myself too hard. Oh no, I'm not going to get the sleep I need. I'm not going to take care of my wellness." And I think now there's also another part of that that I think of when sometimes I think my biggest ambition now is just to take care of my health really well and and take care of all the things in my life really well, like my family and my business.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
take care feels like an ambition in itself.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, your definition of ambition has evolved as your experiences in life have evolved. And it still is important to you in some way. It's just where you focus it evolves, changes. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and also I think I still have business ambitions and career ambitions, no doubt. I just also hold with that at the same time a real care about my own wellness
Yeah.
and make sure that my ambition doesn't ever get so far ahead of me that I'm not paying attention to what I need anymore.
Right. And so I think that's something, I'm looking forward to, kind of delving into together today is how do we, um, you, me, and anyone who's joining us, how do we kind of dance with both wellness and ambition? How do we make them? I'm literally making a Venn diagram with my hands. How do we make them mutually exclusive? And that Venn diagram covers as much as possible. So let's turn to the audience. If you are watching live, again, we want to hear from you. And we want you to answer this icebreaker. Tell us about your relationship to ambition, or what is your ambition? You might have a specific ambition. We'd love to hear what that is, and or what does ambition mean to you? How does it work for you? So please share in the comments your insight around ambition, your feelings around ambition, your thoughts around ambition. And then I'm going to answer because it is a very, similarly to you, kind of, it's a loaded term. I identify as, and I think people who know me and, kind of look from the inside, I would be identified or named as uber ambitious. Like ambition has always driven me. And I think for me, ambition is always, doing, not necessarily doing more, but having a bigger impact. And
Mm,
for kind of 30 years, my energy sustained that. And it was, just I thought it was one of my superpowers was that my ambition drove a lot of what I was able to accomplish. Then, I did have an illness, and then my parents started declining, and I was and still am to one of them a primary caregiver, and kind of the ambition. It was a fight, ambition with sustaining my health and wellness. So, again, when I met you and learned about kind of your situation, I, really connected to that challenge. So, in some ways, I think I had to really redesign what ambition is and can be in order to sustain and figure out, how I want not only the rest of my career, but the rest of my life to be. So,
mhm.
what do you think of that?
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, about some of the things that you've been through. And I mean, I'm curious about, yeah, how you have reshaped that relationship to ambition.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear you say you identify as somebody who's ambitious. Seems like an important piece of the
Yeah.
puzzle as well. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think we'll talk about that, and we each can share, and you can even coach me if you like. So let's see, Julie. So I'm going to share. Julie Perkins said, "Ambition was often a driver in my earlier career, and it has evolved also to more of a chosen motivator.
Mm,
I'm now more ambitious about things that I am passionate about." So what are your thoughts on that?
mhm,
Ambition and passion,
mhm.
choosing, any reflections on that comment? Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about being driven by your passions, that to me indicates an internal motivator. And I do think sometimes when we think of ambition, it sometimes sounds a little bit like the external motivators, at least for me, right? I think when I thought about myself as ambitious as a little bit of a younger person, and certainly pre-kids or pre-illness, I thought more about what are other people going to think of me? How can I, I was in higher ed, so how can I get more lines on my CV, right? That's our little place where we put our awards. That's our award shelf,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And I do think it is somewhat normal and natural as we get to different ages to start to look to more internal motivators, like what am I passionate about, what really
Yeah,
engages
yeah,
me. That's something
yeah,
I work with clients a lot on, is
yeah.
trying to rediscover those things.
For sure, for sure. Awesome. Thank you, Julie Perkins. And again, just to remind people where you are, you're watching Work Life Leader Live, and I'm speaking with Kelly George. She's a career and wellness coach of Kelly George Coaching. And our topic today is learning from long-term illness, wellness, and ambition. And again, if you're watching live on Friday, November 13th, around noon, midday Eastern, please, in the comments, we want to hear your thoughts, questions. Tell us about what ambition is to you, why it matters, does it matter, your relationship with it, and feel free to comment, ask questions as we go. So I'm now going to get curious about kind of Kelly and your kind of this, our title again is learning from long-term illness. So tell us about, that situation. It was a major change in your life. Share with us what you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit of my story with that. I was working as a full-time professor, and I got COVID in 2022, and it very clearly and quickly developed into long COVID. For me, that meant a severely disabling condition that left me off and on bedbound and housebound for several years. So I did progressively, get a little better, get a little worse. So it wasn't like I was at home that whole time, but definitely long pockets of time of just not being able to take care of myself, and certainly not being able to take care of my kids, who at the time were, I think, 7 and 8 or somewhere along those lines, definitely not old enough to care for themselves. So a huge disruption, and I was unable to continue working, which was probably in some ways one of the biggest things to grieve about it. I mean, we're here talking about work, and the loss of work is a huge impact to our identities, to our sense of being an ambitious person, a productive person, a person who contributes. So it really changed it had to change the way I saw myself. Um, and luckily, I have now recovered, but I do have chronic fatigue syndrome, which is often comes along with long COVID. And so that is essentially a relapsing remitting condition, which means it's something that I'll continue to manage probably for the rest of my life, although I feel really good right now. So
Right, right.
something to know.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. You mentioned kind of, and I can completely relate to this, the issue of kind of your identity with work. Can you talk a little more about that? Like how can one's identity change with a major illness? Maybe some of the things you've experienced either with clients. Yeah, I'm just curious about that. And I know I can see we have a few more people who've joined us. And if you're here, let us know where you're calling from in the chat box. Let us know you're here live. Say hello. We're talking about ambition and wellness and dealing with long-term illness. And we'd love to hear questions and your thoughts and your personal situation on these topics also. And then we'll talk about them, and Kelly can add a lot of insight. Okay, so back to my question about identity around, what happens to one's identity when these kind of changes happen?
Yeah, I think we often don't realize how much our identity is tied up in work. And I see this a lot in clients also. I work with people on retirement. It's an issue there. I work with moms, new moms, moms returning to work after having left, We see it at all sorts of different life stages, and I see it with clients who are my chronic fatigue syndrome clients as well. All of a sudden, we are missing this major piece of ourselves. And with a really serious illness, like the one that I experienced, where I was cut off from much of social life, much of work life, much of even family life, you realize that it's the things that you do every day, it's the activities you engage in that are a huge part of what gives you the feeling of you-ness, the feeling of who you are, right? So I would go into work on a college campus, and in that arena, I was Dr. George, and suddenly I was at home in bed, 23 hours a day. And who was I now? Because there was very little that I could do.
Yeah.
Even I had such intense brain fog, it was difficult to read, it was difficult to communicate with others. It was extremely challenging, both physically, emotionally, mentally. And what you realize, I think, or what I realized, is that there must be something else to who I am beyond how I show up at work, beyond all these other things. And I think it really did kind of spark a little curiosity in me, even in that very, very difficult, low situation. And I see that happen with clients also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. The here, I'll put it back up. The title of our conversation is Learning from Long-Term Illness, Wellness, and Ambition. And this conversation could also be kind of learning from, just major transition in your life, learning from intense caregiving in your life. So, it's what I hear you saying is it's when kind of life pulls you out of your kind of your primary role, your primary mojo, kind of the
Mhm.
thing that you personally have identified as a core part of who you are, most likely not all of who you are. Yet, I know a lot of my, working friends and colleagues, we love our work. And so we do go get so much, not only, the vocational and the financial, reasons that we work, but, there's also a lot of personal values. So when we are forced to make a change, I mean, one of the imageries I have from, what you just said, it's almost like, a house of cards can kind of come crumbling down when, you thought maybe that house was much firmer than it was.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a great analogy or metaphor, because you look around at the cards that are all around you, and if you're really lucky, I think, and you have resources and support and people around you who love you, you get to rebuild. And there's many times that I think, when I share my story with people, that I almost sense a little bit of, man, I almost would like to rebuild. Right? Like there's an interesting kind of, I don't want to call it jealousy, but there's a leaning forward and into,
Yeah, yeah,
because our house of cards, right, is so intricate and took so long to build, that the idea of dismantling it intentionally is you often just way too much and overwhelming, and probably not even necessary, right? But if it falls by accident and you get to rebuild it from the foundation up, well, that could be kind of interesting, actually, right?
well, that's a good segue into my next question. But before we do that, let's just take a little intro break. So you're watching Work Life Leader Live right now, and I'm talking with Dr. Kelly George, career and wellness coach, and we're talking about long-term illness. Kelly just shared kind of her, the situation that really changed her whole relationship with wellness and ambition. And so I see we have people watching live. Let us know if you can relate to any of this. I'd love to hear if you've either dealt with a long-term illness or some other major transition, like I shared, that kind of knocks your identity a little off or a lot off. We'd love to hear your story, and if you have questions about it or about anything that Kelly shared, we want to hear your questions too. So just put it in the chat box, and we will engage. So that leads me to my next question, actually, because we're talking about career transitions, and you've described kind of the forced transition of a long-term illness. So you know, how do we be more deliberate about this?
Mm.
Obviously you couldn't, I mean, you didn't do anything to bring COVID on, that just happened to you, excuse my French, it was a shitty thing that you got it. And then, um, you had to deal with consequences that, obviously are lifelong. And, you know, I kind of smiled when you said, oh yeah, some people are like, huh, wow, that's interesting. What it sounds like from that statement was you were describing that people liked the after effect, not necessarily having to go through all the hell you did, but what came out from that process. People are kind of So how does one potentially be deliberate about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I see this happening with clients who, um, I do think it often happens when it's a have to, but it doesn't have to be such a high level have to, right? It doesn't have to be like a survival level push that brings you to a reevaluation of things. But there is often, as you know, a trigger when people come to coaching.
Yeah.
And that can be a really, a common everyday thing. Like, I think there might be layoffs at my work coming up, and that's causing me to reevaluate. It can be something in the health arena. I see sometimes people who have had health scares where they have been fortunate, to not have the big health event. But when they got the scare, they said, ooh, wait a second, something is not right here. I'm not living my values, or I'm not, what I'm doing, very critical to my work is this idea of sustainability. I'm not living in a sustainable fashion.
Yeah.
What I'm doing cannot be the long-term thing.
Yeah.
And so I often think it is external things that push us, but I don't think it has to be the biggest, baddest things. Especially if we're sensitive to it, if we're aware of it.
Right. And so, I think the challenge there is, and it's funny, in my book, I actually wrote one of the keys is around how to be, either overwhelm happens to you, or, you pay attention and you can potentially address it as it's happening, or, it's how do you be deliberate to create something that's more sustainable than, that forced,
Mhm.
again, whether it's illness or something else. And I see we have another comment from Karina. Hi, how are you? Karina's calling in from Europe. I assume you're there. But she said, yes, caregiving to parents-in-law. And so,
Mhm.
it's interesting, that obviously is, kind of was one of my, again, I had two at the same time, but, honestly, the caregiving was in some ways more intense than the illness. Um, and definitely more physically and emotionally draining. So, kind of back to that, you talked about sustainability. Let's talk about that first. Let's talk about what that means to you, and how you support people, or how you help people even think about it in their terms.
Yeah, I mean, when you're thinking just the idea of caregiving, for me, that brings me to caregiving of small children, because that's the, other near experience that I've had. And I see it all the time in that population of parents with young children. You live in survival mode maybe for the first couple of years, let's say, of having, children come into your, i- i- having children at the beginning. And then at some point, I think hopefully people realize, like, oh, I can't go on like this. I need help, or I need to lower the bar somewhere, or maybe I do need to make a change to work, right? Maybe working and caregiving at the same time is not doing it, or maybe the reverse. Like, for me, it's kind of the reverse. When I had really young kids, like, I really couldn't be home with them. That wasn't sustainable for me and for my mental health. I really needed to be out of the home working. So I think it can look like all different things. Um, but I think we're so often on that treadmill or on that merry-go-round, we feel like we can't get off. And, it just takes something to trigger us to think, like, wow, what if I did?
Yeah.
What if I
Yeah.
did step off that treadmill just and take a break for just a second and breathe? and notice that I haven't eaten in 6 hours, or I haven't, gone to use the loo and when I needed to. It's like, it's amazing to me how many clients I talk to and they're like, tell me that they're back to back booked all day and they really didn't schedule any time, you know, to take care of their bodies in
Right.
any way.
Right. Right. So, are there, so, just hearing what you said, I think of tactics. I think of advice, people want advice. But I'm also wondering about mindset. What kind of mindset, because that's what comes up to me. I worked, for, and still do, but, a lot of the work I espouse, is very much, deliberate choices in our career. And I've, fortunately set up a lot of my own structures to enable me to do that. And they all went away when things got really intense. So, my self-care practices, my regular meetings with peers, two dear colleagues who, we support each other professionally and grow our business and be reasonable and call each other out when we're not living how we want to be. And, all those things that I put in place to sustain and live kind of, very fortunately the way I wanted to, they all went out the drain. They just went down the drain.
Mhm.
And so, it's almost like, how do you balance? What are your thoughts on balancing that proactive? How can you just be proactive? And yeah. I mean, just thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying that, yeah, it is sometimes the times when we need to care for ourselves the most that we are, the least able to do it. So there's just no doubt about that. I mean, sometimes it is in terms of, you talk about mindset, sometimes it is saying, okay, well, this is a season where it's just going to be difficult and I am going to have to do my best until another season arises. Um, what I found personally and what I see in clients is something of the opposite sometimes happens as well. Um, I know when I was very sick, I had an incredibly disciplined journaling habit and habit tracking habit. And I had it because I needed it, not because it was fun or because it was like I should do it. I had it because I needed it to live and survive. I had this huge amount of unstructured time. I had very little that I was able to do physically and cognitively. And the only, one of the few tools that really kept me going every day was just sitting down, planning my day in whatever small ways I could. Today I'm going to rest at 11 o'clock and I'm going to have a cup of tea at 12. And at 1, I'm going to walk once around my house because that's all I'm able to do right now. And just no, I think one thing that I like people to know is if there's a strategy you're not able to use at this moment, maybe it's because that's not the one you need, right? Maybe that's not what you need right now. And so, yeah, I think it can go both ways. Sometimes the tools we use are the ones that we need for survival. And if we don't need it, we're not going to use it.
Right, right. Interesting. So I'm just going to pause again, and you're watching Work Life Leader Live, and we're speaking with Kelly George, career and wellness coach around learning from long-term illness and wellness and ambition. So if you have any questions or comments, we love to hear them. We love to debrief them. We'd love to hear about your experiences, either with long-term illness or other major life shifts that have impacted kind of the life that you thought you were going to be living for some period of time. I want to transition a little to burnout. Obviously, that's, we're talking about sustainability. Obviously, the other end of that is burnout. And obviously burnout or the things related to burnout can come from illness. That can be a byproduct of illness, and it can also, again, I hit that burnout wall,
Mm.
probably about 4 years into the intense caring, and it was the last year of my dad's life, and then I thought it was going to be, just give me 6 months. And no, not 6 months, 6 weeks. My dad died in
Mm.
November of 24. And I was like, I'm just going to take it down till January, and that'll be
Mm,
6 weeks, and then I'll be back. But it
mm.
actually took me a year and 6 weeks. So, so I love your thoughts about, burnout, what it is, how you've experienced, how your clients are experiencing it. And again, yeah, how do we dance with it? How do we prevent it? How do we deal with
Yeah.
it when it shows up? That's a very big question. Not,
No,
I'm a coach. Just so you know, any coaches watching, that's not a good way to ask coaching
it's a double
questions.
barrel. No,
That is
I have a two-part answer. It's cool.
Yes, that's called stacking. But as an interviewer, I'm just throwing a bunch of questions out for you to answer. You take it to
Um,
how you want to, Kelly.
all right. Well, the first thing I want to say is thank you for sharing about your sense that, oh, this grief will take 6 weeks, no problem, right? I mean, that's very recognizable to me, and I think to a lot of people dealing with long-term illness and other hiccups or other big traumas, right? Like all the different things in between. We want to schedule it. We want to tell ourselves, gosh, surely this will be a reasonable time. This amount of time will be the time I need to heal. And the truth about obviously healing is it takes as long as it takes, and it does not happen on your schedule. And and that is very painful, and there's a lot of grief around the loss of control that signifies for us. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunity for freedom and expansiveness that comes once you've lived through that. Because I think I will never see a deadline in the same way again. Because I already sat on the biggest, baddest deadline I have seen, which is I don't know if I'm ever going to get better.
Yeah.
And the doctors don't know. And we're just going to wait and see, right? Until it gets to the 6 month or year point and they sort of say, sorry, like you're an outlier and we just can't tell you what's going to happen next. And the experience of working on recovery in the absence of information about what will happen next really will change you. And I think anybody that's been through that kind of thing, and I think again, grief is very similar. It just takes as long as it takes. So I really appreciate that what you're saying about that.
Yeah, it's
It will take
interesting.
six
Thank you. And,
weeks.
and I want to come back to burnout and continue that. But we got another comment from Julie Perkins, and she said, "Thank you for the acknowledgement of grief and its role in recovering from illness. This is often overlooked."
Yeah, there's so much loss. I mean, just a heap of loss, and there's a danger in framing learning from long-term illness because it's sort of just the positive part of it. But the truth is that, of course, it's yeah, just incredibly difficult, challenging emotions that we don't have an option but to live through and continue to live with and through.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. Um, so it's interesting, and I'll just, since I'm in a sharing mode, one of the things that was a huge, and I mentioned, I have two very dear friends who are also coaches who we've supported each other professionally for 20 years. Um, One of the big ahas that or changes, it's not even an aha, it was a change that they helped me get to is, um, at the end of those 6 weeks when I thought I was going to be, back to full force, um, when that wasn't happening, through a conversation, I made a big shift and I stopped business development last January. So it's been over a year because that was, kind of tied to ambition. I was a grinder. Like I loved business development and, for 24 years that was pretty much central to, I'm a coach and I love my clients and, to keep building, your own business, you need to have yourself out there, blah, 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 just kind of keep going. And once I decided, I just need a break from the grind, I still love my work. And what would it be like if I wasn't dialed up to 10 all the time?
Mm,
And,
mm,
you know, that mental shift and it's a time shift. It was huge because I spent a lot of time on that. That was probably the most sustainable decision,
mm.
I've ever made. Now I'm fortunate that I could make that decision. Because where I was in my business and my career, but I think that was a bigger upside than, even I don't know if then it was a headspace thing that really had
Mhm.
a huge impact on kind of things feeling more sustainable.
Yeah, yeah, and how is life different for you now since you let go of that?
I have a lot more time. I have a lot more time and space for my business and, my clients, um and I have a lot more time for other things. With self-care being one of them. As you're younger than me, and what I'm finding is the older I get, the issue of wellness takes more and more time. And so
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
That's
And
right, that's
again,
right.
I assume from your long-term illness, you have this very similar, I mean, in our conversations, I know you had to be very deliberate about your wellness. And so,
Yeah, and I talk with clients about that all the time that, it's this invisible labor that's happening when you have serious illness, or, if you a serious disability. It can often be this invisible labor. You're doing this other full-time job of doctor's appointments. And this is the same goes for caregiving, of
yeah,
course.
yeah.
And you don't get credit for that. Society doesn't give us credit. There's not a line on my CV that's like, she took super good care of herself for 3 years and recovered from long COVID. That
Right,
is not a line that will exist anywhere, right? It
right,
exists
right.
here in this space. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy to have this conversation. And, you can pat yourself on the back pretty hard about it, but, culturally, we don't have a lot of space for celebrating what it takes to do, for example, what you did, Julie. Like, I mean, I want to acknowledge how brave it actually is to say no to something in our lives, to
Well, it was
actually
not
step
easy.
away a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
no, no, yeah. Again, now it's great. There's impact, my, again, I'm fortunate that, because I've been doing this for a while, but if I was doing business development for the last, for 2025 and 20, now, I mean, my business would be, different. My revenue would be different. My client base would be different. And, again, I was privileged and fortunate that I could make that choice. It wasn't easy because, it's like I've been on that treadmill for so long. So jumping off of it felt like very disorienting,
Absolutely.
and sometimes nauseating. I'd be like, "Oh my god, why am I not, at my desk?"
Yeah, wow.
Um, yeah, yeah.
That that's really profound that it felt nauseating. I mean,
Oh,
I imagine that people can really imagine and relate to that. And then it's kind of like, well, it makes me wonder, like, what are we getting from being on that treadmill, right? What is that giving us that we're so afraid to step away from and let go of?
yeah. Well, and so let's ask. This is gonna be my last comment to the audience. Then I want to answer that, and then I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. So I'm curious if folks watching can relate to this treadmill analogy, this issue of how wellness is both um, a critical, if not most critical, priority, and how it keeps growing. And that's not going to change, right? As again, just by the fortune of aging, um,
Mhm.
you know, that will happen. Um, what was I? I switched gears. So we want to hear from anyone watching to share that if they can relate to that, or if they have thoughts on that, or have experienced it differently. But I wanted to come back to you with one question and I can't remember, so that's okay. As a coach, we know when we forget something, it will pop back up. So
It will
all
come
good.
back.
But a couple last questions for you as we wait and see if we get some more comments. But you have some really interesting niches. You're coaching people, obviously recovering from chronic fatigue and long-term COVID. You work with busy moms and professionals who are busy moms, comma, and professionals who are in academia. I'm curious, just as you, because I want to invite you to step back. What do they have in common? I think over time as a coach, we evolve, our niches evolve, and often what shows up for us is kind of what we need. But I'm curious, just if there's any thoughts, or if you've reflected on who you work with.
A lot of the people I work with do have, back to your comment about mindset being critical, do have some mindset work potentially in common, right? So it's not uncommon for me to work with people for whom resting is difficult. Even the people who, maybe even especially the people who have long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome, rest is challenging. To do nothing is challenging. To not be productive is challenging. And there's so much progress, I think, to be made in getting underneath that and figuring out what's at stake for that person when they rest, right? Or what's the mental script that's going on that's telling them like this is, it can be really difficult things. I know just to take myself as an example, I would feel like I was being lazy if I was resting, or I would feel like I wasn't important somehow. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that to do and to produce and to make and contribute gives you that feeling of like worthiness.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I know learning to rest really changed the way I feel about being worthy, just as I am, doing nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I just hear you say that. I know I had to relearn just operating at a different volume.
Yeah. Or a different speed, right? Slowing down.
Yeah.
I mean, because I had cognitive difficulties, I had the experience of, I'm usually a fast talker and jumping in real fast.
Yeah.
I would hear my family in conversation. My brain was so slowed down, I could hear them talk. And I remember I could feel a thought I was having bubbling up. I could feel the urge to say something and jump in. By the time my brain had done all that, because I was working so slowly, the conversation had moved on. I'd never had that happen before in my life. So now suddenly I was the listener. I was just sitting back observing. That wasn't really me before.
Yeah.
And that's just an example of the kind of embodied experience that illness can give you, that really can change the way you see things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny when you said that, I'm thinking, wow, we could just have a whole other conversation on just the language that we use in kind of the self-talk, and even how we, define ourselves verbally, or, how we talk about ourselves to others, and how that shapes, change and the ability to change. So you just brought up something really important. So with that, we actually have to start wrapping up. So I always ask, my final question of my guests is, what are the big rocks? So what's the one or two things, in a brief summary, you want people to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I'm really struck, to be honest, by your story about stepping away from business development. I have to say, I mean, it's not part of my story, so maybe that's why it resonates so deeply with me. But I just think, again, how brave. And I hear all the caveats about, we're fortunate to be able to do it, but there are lots of things in our lives that we can step away from, but we just are afraid to do so. I think just getting curious about that is really, there can be a lot of juice there, right?
Yeah.
The things that we're holding on to, right? I see so many people that want to add things to their life, add. And it very often it's like, no, man, you got to drop 10, 20 other things in order to add even one more thing.
Yeah.
Because there's only so much you have, only so much energy. And that's what I know for sure.
Yes. Well, you, again, that statement, again, you can see I'm moving forward, because I feel like, oh, we could talk there. We have another hour right there. And, but we have to let folks go. So last question for you, Kelly, before I thank our guests, is how can people reach you if they want to learn more about you or just talk about this? What's the best way to contact you?
Please find me at kellygeorgecoaching.com. Very easy, kellygeorgecoaching.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and you can find all those links on my website.
Yeah, and I will put in the comments on LinkedIn, in the comment fields on the LinkedIn thread of this, I will put your contact information too. So I want to thank you. We were fortunate that we've had multiple conversations, and all of them have been just super. And I learned something, and I hope we can do this again. And I want to thank everyone who was with us live. And, if you weren't live, I know a lot of people watch this after the fact. I hope, Kelly's wisdom has enhanced your perspective as much as it has enhanced mine. So thanks all. We'll see you next time. And also last request for everyone who's watching. If you have a guest or you think you'd be a great guest, I'm always looking for, interesting and smart people who can talk about topics at the intersection of work life and leadership for Work Life Leader Live. Because our goal is always to help our viewers think more about these important topics. So thanks so much, everyone. Take good care.
Thank you.